Yo, what up guys, it's Flark and welcome to the Unholy section for the Beginner's Guide to DK PvP. Now if you haven't watched the first video in the series, please go do that. That's going to explain what's going on here. The link will be in the description below. But effectively, I am going to try and bridge the gap to the best of my ability between PvE and PvP for Unholy, or for new players looking to get into Unholy PvP for the first time, it should help explain the fundamentals and rudimentary mechanics that are maybe missing from guides that help you get into PvP without being overwhelmed or overloaded with information you can't use. This will pretty much set a floor that you can then build upon with other videos or just practice and experimentation and get better and better over the course of the season. But everybody's got to start somewhere. Now, Unholy is a very complicated spec. Believe me, it's hard. It's a tough one. There's a lot going on, and I'll try and do my absolute best to explain it in some way that makes sense from an entry level, but we're going to jump right into it right now with macros, just like we started the other ones. And Unholy has some really interesting pet-specific macros that you're going to want to add. And we're starting with one right there. That's Pet Stun, or Gnaw. So what you immediately, you're going to realize you cannot click this ability. That would be terrible during a game. You never want to do that. See how you can press it, but it's going to be clunky. Or you don't want to use it on auto use either. When these abilities are glowing like this, you can see it on the ability right next to it, it's going to automatically use stun pretty much on cooldown, which is not what you want. You want to decide when he's going to stun. So you have to right click that to make it go solid corners like these are and turn that auto use off. And then what you're going to do here is you're going to make this macro /cast Gnaw. That's the name of the ability. You can use arena targeting macros, which we'll talk about in the pet kickstart version. But put that somewhere on your bar and make sure you know exactly what it does. It's a 1 second stun if not in Dark Transform, a 2 second stun if in Dark Transform. And of course, that's not very long. So you need to make sure you use this as a pseudo interrupt, something to stop a quick cast, interrupt a global, or simply stun them for a short period of time, maybe DR'd when they're very low health. But as we've been talking about here with DRs, you don't want to use this at the beginning of a DR chain. So that, remember, that's an 18-second window where if you stun somebody and then stun them again, the next one is under the effect of diminishing return. So it's half value. So if the first stun you use is a 2 second stun, then you're effectively just making your Asphyxiate that you would use after also a 2 second stun, which is super low value. Instead, you want to use your longer stuns first and then follow it up with a quick pseudo interrupt, a quick pet stun to stop them when they're low health, when they're panicking, when they're in a desperate situation. You can stop them one more time, interrupt that cast, and net up a kill. But paying attention to DRs, if we have 2 stuns, and of course your partner might have 2 stuns as well, you don't want to abuse DRs poorly with a pet stun like that. So you want to make sure you're using it in a clutch situation. But of course, that is the macro for it. That's /cast Gnaw or /cast arena target equals arena 1, 2, 3, which will show right here with Leap. Pet Leap is actually called Pet Kick from most people because it's an interrupt generally, but it can also root them, which is another powerful tool. But if you hover over that right now, you can see it says leap behind an enemy target. Not that useful. But in Dark Transform, charge an enemy, interrupt them, immobilize them for 2 seconds. That's a 2 second root. That is very, very useful. So same thing, you're putting that ability, you're taking it off auto use, and we're putting that ability on your bar in the form of a macro /cast. In this case, target equals arena 1 leap. Remember, you put that in brackets and it can leap to whatever target that you want based on where their arena 1, 2, 3 positioning is on Gladius, on S arena, whatever you use. Arena 1 is the top, then middle, then bottom, going down 2, 3. So that allows you to actually throw out a pet kick on an off target to pseudo interrupt them. No matter who you're targeting, no matter who your pet's targeting, it will charge over to them and interrupt them if they're in range. But remember, pet kick is even more interesting than that because it has a minimum yard requirement. You see it says 5 to 30 yard range, not 30 yard range. So if they're directly on top of them, it can't charge to them, thus it can't pet kick them. So you have to move it away from move to commands, or you have to just kick something off what your pet is hitting. So let's say your pet's doing a lot of damage to a combat rogue, which is actually outlaw. Gladius hasn't changed that yet. An outlaw rogue, and you want to kick the priest, you absolutely could do that by using this targeting macro. If the priest is arena 1 and the rogue is arena 2, you can be attacking the rogue and then pet kick the priest with this macro. So there's a lot going on there. But the bottom line is make some target arena 1, 2, 3 macros for leap. Make sure they're on your bar. And then when you need to interrupt a cast real quick, just quickly pseudo-interrupt. Maybe a mage is casting poly, maybe a Ardruid is casting clone, or a shaman is getting a healing surge off. You can interrupt any of those things as long as you know where they're positioned here, and you got good reflexes, and your pet is in dark transformation, making him this hideous behemoth that does more damage and has more effects. So good for him. Way to go. But the other thing, and it has this small niche use, is it's also a root. So you can use it not only as a kick, not only as a pseudo interrupt, but also as a quick peel. If a melee is running at your DPS or at your healer and you want to peel them in any way whatsoever, you can get a quick pet root on them, immobilizing them in place, giving them a chance to close or to create some distance and get away and maybe heal themselves. So it's a pretty niche use, but that's the power of Unholy. It has all these niche mechanics that if all done perfectly, believe me, I don't, but if they are, you have this crazy toolkit with a lot of difficult to predict interactions. The enemy team will not see these things coming, and playing around them is obviously impossible because of all these small little interactions. But that is pet kick and pet stun in a nutshell. You've got slash cast leap and slash cast gnaw, and you want to take them off auto use, and now you have your pet utility bound to your own potential. You actually have it at your will rather than the pet's, and that's a lot better, believe me. The other thing you can do is macro pet attack to something, either APOC or Scourge Strike, and I'll explain why. Your pet, if it interrupted a healer, if it's currently targeting a healer, if it's getting taunted by something, sometimes will attack somebody else, somebody that you're not attacking. So if you macro it to your burst, you make sure that your pet is always on your target slash pet attack during your burst, which during Dark Transformation, your pet does a lot of damage. I went one step further because I'm a nutty and I wanted as much output as possible because I believe with Forset, Frenzied Monstrosity, and all these insane modifiers, your pet damage is going to be an extreme component of your damage, especially in PvP since it's difficult to peel. So, I actually just macroed it. I don't know if this is a good idea yet. I'll get back to you, but you can macro it. I macroed it to Scourge Strike, so you're constantly spamming pet attack on your target, which means especially during Dark Transform or with your modifiers, or God forbid if your Forset ever procs and you get 50% more pet damage, you're making sure that it's attacking your same target and you're getting full use out of that damage. So that's a little niche macro you can use as well. You can just macro something to slash pet attack, one word. And finally, and this is very simple, so we won't talk about it much, make sure you have a burst macro with the two things off the global that Unholy has. Unholy, and we'll talk about this in just a second, has a ton of abilities on the global cooldown. So macros for your burst, pretty much not going to happen. They're all on the global cooldown. But like every class, your badge and your racial are off the global cooldown for Orc racial, of course. So I macroed them to APOC since it has the same cooldown as Unholy Assault, and that's effectively how you can send your big burst. I might be switching that over to Dark Transform depending on how insane this Forset is, but pretty much it's very simple. Macro your trinket and your racial to whatever cooldown that you're doing the most damage in, and you've got a small little burst macro. Doesn't mean much, but it saves you some buttons, and you're probably going to be pressing them at the same time anyway, so pretty powerful there. And those are your macros. Macros for Unholy specifically, the pet utility ones are super important, but make sure to have that pet attack somewhere macroed or on your bar to make sure that you can reel your pet back in when you're doing damage. Very important, slash pet attack. Next, and this is probably the reason you're here, the most complicated part of Unholy is the setup, the opener, and your burst rotation. And one of the reasons this is so complicated, another self shout out, check out the Unholy video that'll explain this further, but you can pretty much use almost any set of PvE and PvP talents as long as you've got coordination and synergy and you know what they do to great avail, which means you could switch off on Blight and have Swords, or you could switch off of Unholy Assault and have Army of the Damned, or you could switch off of Raise A-Bomb and use Necro Bargain. And that completely changes not only your burst rotation, but also the setup globals that you even have. So forget about just one burst setup that I would have to give. You would have to do dozens, right? Because there's so many combinations of these things you could do. So instead of going through every possible combination of all the cooldowns you could have as Unholy, I'll instead do a little bit more general than that. Explain how Unholy works and what makes it the way that it is. Right now, Unholy has a torrent of sustained damage. And once all your cooldowns are pressed, you have like 6 sources of damage. Pets, disease, summoned pets, another summoned pet, maybe Crypt Fever if you're using Bargain, your own personal globals. You have Unholy Blight as well, possibly, another form of disease, right? So once your setup globals are done, the damage becomes relentless, very difficult to peel, and overwhelmingly high output. Plus, with Immortal Strike passively baked into all of that, necrotic wounds. So the biggest thing is making sure that you're using the setup globals that make the most sense on your way to the target, and then doing your setup globals before doing your standard rotation. Like, the biggest thing to learn is don't just start Fester striking and then Scourge striking right when you got to your target. Do your setup globals and use the wounds that those globals provide to do your burst rotation, and only Festering Strike when you absolutely need to. Otherwise, you might overcap, waste runes, or waste globals. When you have this many globals to use, wasting globals is a complete no-no, right? So what you might want to do with this crazy setup I have with all of these globals to press, I put this together specifically to show the max amount of globals you might press, is Chains of Ice your target, drop Raise A-Bomb on them, Unholy Blight as you're running in, Unholy Frenzy, Dark Transform, APOC, and Limb. And then you're spamming Scourge Strikes. Look at this. Have I pressed a Festering Strike yet? Absolutely not. Because A-Bomb and Infected Claws are applying wounds for me, I still haven't pressed a Festering Strike. And that's one of the biggest things. Even though this won't be as concise as the Frost version with your exact rotation, one thing, a huge takeaway with this burst rotation that I just did, is I pressed Festering Strike once, and it was at the end when I started walking away. Using that button poorly is one of, I think, the biggest mistakes that you can make in a Holy Opener. There's literally no reason to press it. It does little damage and only applies wounds, which you might already have. So it wastes 2 runes and a global for absolutely no reason, right? So use the wounds that you've generated as a result of all these setup globals, which I'll go over again. I know that was fast. I'll do it one more time. While spamming your spender, Scourge Strike, or Clawing Shadows, depending on what you're running. You're seeing the complication of all of these different talent builds already, right? Make sure all your setup globals are down, and then just set up your go perfectly so you can just spam Scourge Strike, spam, 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 and be using the best global per window that you possibly can. But remember, that setup was all of the possible cooldowns you could have on this spec. You might not have that many if you're playing maybe a Bargain, Clawing Shadows, Army of the Damned setup for fast APOC. You're going to lose Unholy Assault and A-Bomb in your opener rotation. So anything that you lose, you could just take that out of the setup globals portion and just spam damage the way that you were doing it without those 2 setup globals. But again, that was chains on both. You're going to drop Raise A-Bomb on them. You're going to put down Unholy Blight as you're running in. You're going to play that Unholy Friends, get enough wounds for APOC, get your Dark Transform out, and you have more haste, which allows you to go through your globals faster and span damage easier. Right? So, that is the setup. It is effectively, in a nutshell, setup globals, spam spenders, you use Death Coil for resource gen, only Festering Strike when you have to. And that will do the best overall output that you could possibly do in a PvP environment while making the best use out of your A-Bomb window, because you got all your setup globals out. Boom, you press A-Bomb. Everybody's pulled in. They're getting cleaved to death, and you got 20% extra damage from your legendary, hello, Risk Guards of the Abomination. 20% extra damage with all your setup globals already done means everything you press is going to be doing 20% more damage. Your pets, your limb ticks, your accentuated globals from 20% more haste from Unholy Frenzy, your Dark Transformation minion, every APOC ghoul, Unholy Blight disease, your outbreak disease. You want to make sure all of that stuff is out and ready to make sure that you're getting the most damage in a small window. But that's not all you care about. You don't care about just your rotation or what buttons to press. What you really care about is how to set up a go in the first place. Now, unlike Frost, you don't have some AoE CC, so it is more important that you really milk that single target pressure rather than trying to set up like a grip blind stun like Frost has. But you do want to make sure there's cross CC. That's extremely important. So if you're playing, let's say, with a Windwalker, what can you tell me about Windwalker's stun? It's a leg sweep that goes around them in a circle. Do they want to roll over and sweep the healer, then roll back? No. They're sweeping the DPS. You are using Asphyxiate right here, which you can, of course, do Arena 1, 2, 3 macros with, to stun the healer. So, an important thing to think about is what stun does your partner have? In what way do they want to use it? Windwalker and DH, they have an AoE around them stun. So you want to stun the healer, they want to stun the DPS. Stormbolt, Asphyxiate can be used interchangeably, right? It may be better for them to, at that time, maybe they're closer by to the healer, they can Stormbolt the healer, charge back, and then you can Asphyxiate the DPS, right? So it depends on what DPS you're playing with. Windwalker and DH, you always stun healer, and Warrior, you can be interchangeably based on position or what cooldowns you guys have available. But what you want to do is you want to set up that cross CC, so stuns on everybody, to the best of your ability. You can also, of course, grip in for a sweep or grip in for a Nova. The only reason you wouldn't want to do this is if you have some potential for like an extend cross CC setup. Like maybe we want to use breakable CC on the healer afterwards, and if he gets pulled in and sweeped, then you're just going to break the next CC you have in the chain. What are some examples of this? Para from a Mistweaver. Para from a Windwalker. Imprison that he's not using Big Imprison. Fear. That's a great one. If you have stun, if you want to asphyxiate into fear, you don't want to grip sweep into fear because the fear is going to immediately break, but sometimes the extra CC is more valuable than the extra cleave. These are the types of things you think about, and they're all situational over the course of the game. If that healer has no trinket, but maybe he has one defensive that you think he could use right after the grip AoE stun that would save him, instead of gripping him in for the sweep, just like I said, asphyxiate the off target, have your priest or any other, like a hex, maybe you're playing with an Arshaman, that's a great example. A healer hexes out of your stun, or the priest runs in and fears out of your stun, and you do a separate go on the DPS. So that extends the CC chain much longer than it would have been. That combined with this burst rotation now defines pretty much every setup you'll ever do as DK. It's very high pressure in a small period of time while you're pulling all the melee together. You can do it in one of two ways. Grip healer, triple stun, cleave everybody with A-bomb limb, nuclear damage, or sweep double DPS, stun double DPS, stun into more breakable CC on the healer if that's the option you're going to do. Both are situational, both depend on the comp that you're playing, and both require practice and experimentation to get the feel for when both are the best. But that paired with this opener rotation is how you're going to net kills in this game. All you're trying to do is figure out what could I do to the enemy team that stops them from having an answer so we win here with the damage we're about to do. Because just doing damage the whole time, maybe they'll be able to heal through it and they'll eventually set up a go that you can't handle and you'll die. But if they're getting constantly triple, cross CC'd, lockdown, grip sweep, then the next one, okay, we got his trinket, now let's just sweep the DPS and asphyxiate into hex on the healer. These are the types of things that as you practice and learn, you're going to get remarkably more pressure just from the way that you're using your crowd control effects. So that's one way you can set up pressure. Of course, the other way is just using limb as a setup tool, right? If you want to, you can just limb on 3 people close to each other, and it's going to do a universal pull everybody in. You can just use that as a go. Unholy's A-bomb limb itself does so much damage that the very art of pressing this button gives you a go. So combining that with things like Spear or Nova to keep them in this place that you just yanked them all into, is also nuclear damage. And with all the modifiers, the conduits, and of course this legendary A-bomb limit itself is just a win condition for Unholy. So make sure that button is getting the most value through CC and hard stuns that you possibly can. Vortex, Spear, these are other abilities we talked about that can be added. That's Ursul's Vortex from an Ardruid or Kyrian Spear from a Warrior. They can be placed on the blender zone, and of course amplifying your go that much more. And that's offensive play for Unholy. There's a lot more to it, but of course some of it's just rotational. You can get that from PvE or questing, and some of it's just like every comp plays differently. You're gonna have to play games to experiment with this, otherwise the video is gonna be 4 hours long, and that's 3.5 hours longer than I want it. So we'll stay with that and use that as a floor to build onward, to learn as much as you possibly can about how to get offensive pressure as Unholy. Next, we'll go into some of the defensive play and peeling that only results in Unholy, right? We already talked about IBF and AMS and some of these chains as tools during the general video. Again, link in the description for that. But Unholy has a slightly different toolkit to Frost that will make some niche decisions. For example, while Frost is always going to choose Blind, Unholy has no useful talents in that row. It doesn't get Blinding Sleet, so instead it chooses Asphyxiate. So instead of having a 5-second breakable CC, we have that stun we have just been talking about ad nauseum. So if you're using it for goes, how are you using it to peel? And that's when the situational awareness of this game comes in, right? So let's say Asphyxiate is up, but you don't have your offensive cooldowns, but a warrior with no trinket just pressed Avatar. Stun him, right? Stun that player. Of course, everything is not so scripted. We just talked about how Asphyxiate can be used to generate immense offensive pressure, but sometimes a warrior presses Avatar right in your face. He doesn't have trinket to get out of Asphyxiate, and you don't have your cooldowns for 30 seconds, so you can't wait on your go, right? Maybe your monk doesn't have sweep, you can't set up anything right now, and if you don't stun him right now, somebody on your team is going to die. Stun him. Situational awareness. That's why keeping a great track of the visual representations on the screen. Where do they have trinket? When are their cooldowns coming back up from Omnibar? Oh my god, Weakor has just yelled at me. Avatar Warbreaker is going off. My god, we got to do something or we die instantaneously to a 40k execute, right? That is when you will go off script. Now, Asphyxiate is not your I win the game, let's do a bunch of damage button. It's thank god the warrior is stunned for 4 seconds, we might not lose here button. And just like Frost, those abilities can be followed up by getting distance. It's not just 4 seconds of CC that Asphyxiate generates, because if you get distance in those 4 seconds, you can use Chains of Ice as further CC, which you will not have been able to use before. For example, let's say I'm directly on this guy and he's a warrior, and I press Chains of Ice on him, and we're just both walking together. He still cranks me 3 globals before I even get away. But if I Asphyxiate him first, get some distance, and then chains him, now the chains is effectively a hard CC out of that, because he can't connect to me. If he doesn't have charge, or if I'm out of charge range, let's say I got far enough out and he's changed over there, he can never get into charge range. He can't do anything with his Avatar Warbreaker. So we turned an instant I win button for them into no pressure at all, simply by understanding what's going on during the game, tracking Avatar, getting a weak aura for it, and seeing that he doesn't have trinket. We can separate, we can get distance, and we can stop goes with Asphyxiate, just like we can start our own goes. The other thing that I touched on briefly, and we'll touch on it again because it's a perfect segue here, is that Dark Transformed Leap, right? You really do want to use this as pet kick as much as you can, but geez, if you Asphyxiate and he trinkets, let's say he does have trinket, but if you don't Asphyxiate him, you're dead anyway. So you Asphyxiate, you get his trinket, he's charging over to your healer, and you immediately root him with the pet root version of Leap with Dark Transform. 2 seconds of root is effectively like a DR Asphyxiate. It's a half Asphyxiate. It's 2 seconds, which is half of 4. So you're getting value out of this. And if you stunned him, got his trinket, and rooted him, that might be just enough time for him to get distance for, again, you to pair that with chains. It's not just about the effect of a Dark Transformed root that's so valuable. It's not just about 2 seconds of root that's so valuable. It's the distance that you can gain in those 2 seconds that turns chains into another CC. If he charges to your healer, bolts him, and your healer cannot get away, then Chains does nothing. But if he's just a little ways out, and the warrior's chains, and the warrior has to struggle to get back to him in the Stormbolt, and when the Stormbolt ends, the warrior disconnected and he can keep running with those chains on him. Now you've effectively got an 8-second peel because of Chains of Ice. You're using these small, what seems like, nah, that's not enough. Avatar is going to kill me anyway. Asphyxiate does nothing. You're using these buttons in tandem with the best snare in the game, Chains of Ice, to generate distance and thus generate CCs out of nowhere. And that is what Unholy can do super well with Asphyxiate and Pet Root combined with Chains. Also, Pet Stun follows the exact same thing as Asphyxiate, but with lower duration, so you really have to make it count. Those 3 buttons together give Unholy its little pseudo-utility toolkit that's difficult to use. Believe me, I don't use it perfectly at all. Difficult to use, but once understood, the power is very clear. And that's peeling as Unholy. Defensive management is pretty much identical because you don't have blind like Frost, so we don't have to go over that section. So effectively, those peeling tools are also your defensive tools because otherwise everything else is the same. Zone, IBF, AMS, again, peep the other video for all of the information on that. So what you're doing is you're using these disruption tools as defensives, and that's your defensive play. Much like the other sections would tell you, in order to directly play defensive against certain comps, you'll do the same thing. Zone a Mage's Combust. Zone a Ret's Wings. Zone a DK's A-Bomb Limb. You might zone each other's A-Bomb Limb. You probably have to. Otherwise, one of you gets a free go-off. You don't want to let that happen. You can also use A-Bomb Limb as a multiple peel, right? A-Bomb's Limb for Unholy does so much more damage than Frost. You can use this as a peel through pressure and through the grips. Unholy A-Bomb Limb actually just does raw damage even without like something to go with it. So you can just crank them by pressing this at any time. Use it as a grip to pull a melee away from your healer, another melee away from your healer, and then counter pressure them so they immediately have to stop what they were doing and refocus on you. So you have these defensive tools outside of the main DK toolkit that are effectively just using these buttons in defensive ways to peel for your teammates and to keep them alive. Otherwise, the only other thing that Unholy brings to the table is this really interesting 10-second AMS instead of a 5-second AMS with the absorb being higher. This makes you very, very disruptive to mage goes, to any wizard cleave goes, because you can effectively immune yourself to CC for 10 seconds instead of 5 and make it so you can peel for your teammates when they're trying to cross CC you. Remember, a rogue, a mage, and a priest. Kidney 1, Poly the other, Fear the third. If you can stop one of those things, if you can AMS the Poly, AMS the Root, AMS the DB, to make the DB ring, to make sure that you are not CC'd in that that triple cross CC that they love so much, you can now throw your Asphyxiate out on the rogue right when he presses Kitty, because you're not CC'd. They can't stop you from stopping them. So he presses Kitty, you press Asphyxiate, and you've stopped to go from 2 abilities, very synergistic with each other. Of course, you can do that with 5-second AMS, but Spell Eater really gives you a window to immune quite a bit of CC. Double the duration. I don't think I have to explain why that's so valuable for preventing CC. You got it up for double the time. So Spell Eater, another good tool in Unholy's toolkit for making sure that you use these buttons like AMS, in a way that's not just, oh, I have a Chaos Bolt cast on me, I will press AMS. Absolutely, that's a great idea. But if you just let your partner die because they're not combusting you, so why would I press AMS? That means you lost a game that you might have been able to win. If the mage is combusting a warrior, and you have AMS to stop the cross CC, and you can asphyxiate the mage to stop combust from going off, then that is just as good as AMSing a combust that's on you. Because what AMS does is prevent you from losing the game, and what that did prevented you from losing the game. That is the goal. The goal is to use things in whatever way gives you a chance to win the game. And that's why there are all these alternate versions of these spells that effectively, of course, the spell's doing the same thing all the time, but how you use it impacts how things are going. So that's defensive play in a nutshell for Unholy, and we'll finish it up right here with just some popular matchups and who to target in them. I wanted to keep these sections separate between Frost and Unholy because Unholy has a totally different way to do damage than Frost does. It's more single target oriented. You have Immortal Strike, but most importantly, you have just raw, sustained pressure, never-ending damage that keeps you aggressive at all times rather than just every minute I'm doing a scripted go. Okay, I got nothing now. Okay, minute's over. Now I can do damage again, which means Unholy really likes to grind people out of cooldowns. So you find the target that really is susceptible to constant damage. So they don't have like a constant form of self-healing. They have more like kiting or walls for big burst, but they don't have a big sustained healing toolkit. And you just go that player. While you're doing this off CC, you just grind that player. What's a great example of this? Rogue. Rogue can get shredded. So can Mage, honestly. But a lot of times, TSG can just run, that's Warrior DK, can just run down a Rogue. Because they have Cloak and Evasion, yes. And that's really disruptive to Frost DK. But Unholy, if it's just always doing damage, you always have 2 Mortal Strikes on them from Necrotic Wounds. You always have extra sources of damage if they're kiting you or trying to get re-stealths like Pet and Diseases and Unholy Blight and A-Bomb. All of these forms of damage, that Cloak Evasion goes down. They don't have Vial. What do? They can't spam Death Strike. They have no D-stance to sit. They don't have Wogs. They're just taking unlimited damage with having no answer to it at all. So what you want to do as Unholy is say, all right, you get into Gladius. You see 3 players on the other team. Which of those 3 players has like big stops to burst windows, but not a lot of self-sustain? And that's the player you want to go. RMP, we love Rogue, right? Warrior, actually, we love killing Arms Warrior, especially with the D-stance nerf. They don't have a lot of self-healing. Your magical damage ignores all their armor. And if they're forced to sit D-stance, especially with the nerf, they're not doing anything. 20% damage reduction really cripples their damage. So Warrior in Ret Warrior, Warrior in Turbo, Rogue in RMP, Rogue in S-Priest Rogue, or S-Priest, because while they have Fade as an answer to a big go, if you're constantly sitting on them, they can't kite, they can't do anything, you're kicking them on cooldown, they're effectively a training dummy for TSG. Unholy Warrior into Shadow Priest, a complete training dummy. There are some things that are much harder, though, to find that on. For example, Jungle. Who's the squishy target to sustain damage against Jungle? Not the Hunter. He can feign off all of our wounds. What a fucking tragedy that is. Well, not the Feral. He has constant walls, self-healing, bear form, frenzied, regrowths. It's not the Feral. Sometimes it could be the squishiest target to your type of damage on their team. It could be their healer. Disc Priest, Holy Priest. Holy Priest has Fade, but he's susceptible to grind, and so is Disc. Disc has Barrier, but once the barrier is down, you just kick him on cooldown. Kicked on Penance, kicked on Shadowman by your teammate, Pet kicked again. He can't cast anything, he's sitting in your face, he can't kite you, he's a priest, he doesn't have a lot of mobility, you can stop Door of Shadows, you can Pet stun it. You just have so many disruptive tools, he doesn't have an answer. So don't just think about, okay, 2 DPS, wait, Feral, no, Hunter, no, all right, we just lose. Sometimes you gotta look at the healer. That might be your answer, especially another pseudo CC, except it's not. It's a hard CC that's Strangulate. Stun, kick, Pet stun, Strang. You have so many tools to lock down a healer. Never underestimate how sometimes, with proper play and understanding from your healer that you're gonna be chasing this disc, that could be the answer. But remember, don't use healers as a catch-all. I'm at fault for that, believe me. You absolutely can grind out DPS. And while I've been playing Unholy this season, it's actually helped me retrain my mind to, find the DPS that's the best target on their team. So that's a lot about who to target in specific matchups and how you're going to handle those specific matchups. And that, my friends, hopefully, between all 3 of these videos, gives you some form of an entry point into PvP. Is it everything you could possibly know? No. No, it's not. Some of these people have been playing this game for 10 years. 10 years of PvP. 15 even. How long has this game been out? 15 years of player versus player combat. Consolidating all that into a YouTube video is not going to happen. Unfortunately, the rest is going to be on your end. Practice. talking with your teammates, coordination, communication, watching streams, learning, improving, looking inward and seeing what you might have done wrong before you blame somebody else. I wish I did that better, but you could be my spitting image. You could be better than me. You could do what I wish I could do. Practice, self-reflect, and learn everything you possibly can learn. And be a better DK than me. Go be the top DK. Be the top DK in this game starting here. That is what I hope from you. I hope you have a wonderful season, because if there's ever going to be a season to get into DK PvP, it's this one. Once our 4 sets come out, we're going to be strong, and I hope that you're able to milk that power now. Enjoy the season, guys, and Godspeed.